Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are here again for the final session for this month of Dr. Rabbi Jon Kelsen's Haftorah Shiur. Without further ado, Dr. Kelsen, good afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Noah. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to you all. Pleasure to be here once again with you for our exploration of the weekly Haftorah. This week for Parashat Vayeshev, we are focusing on the story or the text from the prophet Amos. Amos, like the Haftorah from the past few weeks, Amos is a prophet from Trei Asar, from the 12 minor prophets, and so-called because of their length, and prophesizes, as it says at the beginning of the text. Let me just open it up in my Tanakh over here. Excuse me. It's prophesizing during the time of when the tribes, the kingdoms, have been split into two: the tribe, the kingdom of Judah in the south, and the kingdom of Israel in the north. As it says in the beginning of the prophet Amos, these are the words of Amos. He's from Tekoa, who prophesies to Israel during the days of Uzziah, Melech Yehuda, Uzziah, the king of Judah, the southern kingdom, Ubiyamei Yeravam ben Yoash, Melech Yisrael, and concurrently the days of Yeravam, son of Yoash, Melech Yisrael. And Amos is prophesying during that time, and I stress that he's not the only prophet, of course, prophesizing during the time of the split kingdoms by any stretch. He's roughly concurrent with Hosea, for example. But given this week's Parashah is Parashat Vayeshev. And Vayeshev marks, I'd say, the transition from the Jacob narratives, what we might call the Joseph narratives, where Joseph, Jacob continues to be, a prime player, but we can call Joseph the primary protagonist as we follow him on his journeys and on his travails. The story of Joseph is one of brother against brother, or brothers against brother. This is the story of Joseph, the 12 tribes, the sons of Jacob, who are reared together in their father's home, and yet the brothers hate Joseph, and so much that they betray him, eventually sell him to the Midianim or Yishmaelim, start the journey, in fact, of the whole family into exile into Egypt. So in that context, one just meta note is it is not surprising to draw from the prophet Amos, who was living at a time of brother against brother, that is to say, of the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. And it's not surprising to have a Haftorah taken from that period in history and juxtapose it with our Parashah, which is maybe, it's not the original story of brother against brother, that would be Cain and Abel, but it's an early one, and a dramatic one, and one which is very significant, I'd say, in Jewish historical and traditional memory. To be clear, by the way, when I say the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel are in a sense brother against brother, we're calling them brother against brother. I don't know that they saw each other as brethren, really. We're talking about countries. Good morning, Ramel. About countries which literally, kingdoms, I should say, which literally were at war with one another. This is not sibling rivalry. I have a few little ones and they're fighting over the Legos. That's one thing. I'm talking about actual warfare. I was recently listening to a lecture which was portraying the two kingdoms as that they saw each other not as of the same stock. Even maybe they, in some sense, they remember themselves being related. But you were talking about kingdoms where you're Yehudi Judah, or Yisraeli, you're from Yisrael, and you're two different people entirely. You don't even worship at the same place, by the way. You have Jerusalem in the south and Beit El in the north. This was an illustration. Don't think that, well, they're all Jews. Let's not be anachronistic here. So, speaking of anachronisms or not, lest you think that the polarization and splits only emerged recently. They're quite early and dramatic. I hope they don't reach that point again where you have to distinguish between a Yehudi and Israeli, God forbid. But that was apparently the case. And just again, the meta point, right? To read Amos and juxtapose with the story of Joseph and his brothers is A, not surprising, and B, already casts the story of Genesis within a certain relief, right? Invites one to read the later stories in light of the earlier ones, and willy-nilly, once you're going in that direction, you go in the other direction to read the earlier in light of the later, etc. Okay, that's not my major point. I want to open with that point. The text itself that we're going to be dealing with, the Haftorah itself, is taken from the second chapter of Amos. I'm just going to screen share with you just to show you some of the structure of Amos preceding our Haftorah, and then we'll get into the Haftorah and investigate the potential connection between the Haftorah and the Parashah, as is our mandate here. So let me just pull up the story of Amos for you over here. Okay, should be it. One second. Here we go. Okay. So Amos, we're going to be reading from Amos chapter 2, but just to go to the beginning for 1 second, I just wanted to show you something structural, which is that Amos starts with Divrei Amos. We just read this. The words of Amos, some people translate the sheep reader from Tekoa, the shepherd from Tekoa, who prophesies when he did, and proclaims that God, Mitzion Yishag, U'Yerushalayim Yitain Kolo, God is roaring like a lion from Zion, shouting aloud from Jerusalem. That's interesting because they mentioned right before that this was 2 years before an infamous earthquake. So this idea of the God roaring, maybe echoes literally that earthquake. But what you have in Amos chapter 1 leading to chapter 2, which is where our Haftorah is situated, is a repeating structure. Ko Amar Hashem, Al Shalosha Va'al Arba'ah. Thus says God, for 3 transgressions, X, for 4, Y. So what happens is, for example, God says, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, something, maybe, I will forgive, but for 4, I will not revoke it. And then articulates some of the transgressions of Damascus. It'll go on to address other nations. And by the way, that's an interesting feature of some of these prophets, where it's not only the prophet Yonah who is sent to Nineveh, so the prophet who is sent, an Israelite prophet or Jewish prophet who's sent to prophesy against or regarding other nations. You also find that in other prophets as well. I mean, Amos is also speaking, or primarily speaking, to the people of Judah and Israel, but he's not Yonah's not the only one. Anyway, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, for 4 I will not revoke it. It's a mysterious phraseology, and I'll come back to that in a second. But he says, because they threshed Gilead with threshing boards of iron, right? They attacked Gilad, and therefore I will punish them, and basically destroy Damascus. Then it goes on, the same structure, Komar Shem Ashlosha Pishe Aza Arba Lo Eshivenu, for the people of Gaza, right? I will, for 3 transgressions, again, it's not clear what it's saying, maybe means for 3 transgressions I will forgive, but not for the 4th, because they exiled an entire population which they delivered to Edom, and therefore I will, punish them. And God goes on, for 3 of Tyre, but for 4 will not revoke it. So this is the structure of the chapters. And as you scroll down, as it were, you get to Moab and their sins and their 3 and 4. And then you finally get to, at verse 4 of chapter 2, turning to Judah. Ko amar Adonai, al shlosha pishei Yehuda va'al arba lo ashivenu. For 3 transgressions of Judah, but for 4 I will not revoke it. Again, it's not clear. There's 3 Does it mean that for 3 I'll forgive, but not for 4? That's at least how one Midrashic reading has it. Or does it mean for having so many transgressions, 3, not just 1 and 2, but 3 and 4, I gotta have had it? Other readers say even for only 3 or 4. So it's unclear how exactly to interpret that phrase, that sort of trope. But for 3 transgressions of Judah, for 4 I will not revoke it, because they have spurned the teachings of the Lord. Al ma'asam et Torat Adonai v'chukav lo shamaru v'yatum kizvehem. They have spurned the teachings of God. They have not observed God's laws. Yatum kizvehem asher alchu avotam acharehem. Beguiled by delusions after which their fathers walked. And therefore I will destroy Judah, Shalachti Eish Yehuda, V'achla Armanot Yerushalayim, and it should devour the fortresses of Jerusalem. This is all like the preamble, if you will, to the Haftorah. The Haftorah starts as follows, with that backdrop. But here, while heretofore, the 3 and the 4 have of the other nations have been, I'd say, somewhat, if not vague, they're not overly articulate in terms of the exact problems, the sins of the nation to which Amos is addressing at that given point in the text. When we turn to our Haftorah and to the address to Israel, then the prophet, waxes poetic. Ko Amar Hashem. And here's our Haftorah. Ko Amar Hashem. Al Shlosha Pishe Yisrael, Al Arba'a Lo Ashivenu. And I'm going to just read it a little bit with you. And I'm actually then going to pause and ask you, well, what do you think so far? Why is this Haftorah per se, this part of Amos per se, chosen to parallel Parshat Vayeshev? Okay, I'm gonna ask you to think about that for a minute and share some thoughts, and then we'll continue talking together. So, Ko Amar Hashem, Al Shlosha Pishe Yisrael V'al Arba'a Lo Ashivenu, Al Michram Ba'Kesef Sadik, Ve'Evyon Ba'Avor Na'alayim. Here the translation is, because this particular translation, because they have sold for silver a tzaddik, I'll leave that untranslated, the evyon, and the downtrodden, the poor, the needy, the evyon ba'avor na'alayim, for a pair of sandals. Hashoafim alafar eretz berosh dalim, you who, one translation, you trample the heads of the poor, alafar eretz berosh dalim, and you trample it into the dust. V'derech anavim yatu. This is also hard to translate. One translation is, and make the humble walk a twisted course. Others have, and sort of twist the way of the humble. Ish v'aviv yelchu al na'ara l'ma'an chalel et shem kodshi. Father and son go to the na'ara, to the same girl, l'ma'an chalel, in order to, or thereby, are mechalel shem kodshi, profane my holy name. Va'al bigadim chavulim yatu eitzel kol mizbeach. They recline, by every altar, on garments taken in pledge. V'yein anushim yishtu, they drink in the house of their god. Wine, bought with fines they impose, they translate. Yein anushim, right? Language of onesh, of punishment. V'yain anushim yishtu beit Elohehem. And yet I, God, destroyed the Amori before them. The Amori who was so great, whose stature was like the cedars and was stout as the oak. I brought you out of Egypt. I led you through the desert for 40 years to possess the land of the Amorites. And I raised up prophets from among your sons. And Nazirim, Nazarites from among your young men. O children of Israel. Is that not so? But what did you do? Tashkuat Nazirim yayin. You fed wine. You caused the Nazirim to drink wine. Val Haniviim sivitem lemor. And regarding the Nazarites, the prophets, you said, Lo tinavo, do not prophesy anymore. Let me pause there. This is the beginning of the Haftorah. I'm going to pause for a minute. I have on my clock, it is 7:15 a.m. your time. Let's pause for 1 minute. And if you have a hard copy of the text, or if not, I'll sort of scroll through again, perhaps. What are you seeing here that evokes the Parashah? And maybe even what's it saying? Once you note some sort of connection, how do you think what is it saying about the Parashah? So I'll let you do that I'm actually going to mute myself for a second.
So the idea of selling.
Actually, Zell, you know what? 1 second. Can you hold that can you hold that just for 1 second? I'll give people a chance to think, and then you'll go first.
Oh, okay.
Thank
I don't
you.
have to go first.
You first in just 45 or so seconds. Thank you, though. It's good to hear your voice. I know some people do crosswords first thing in the morning to get their neurons firing. So we do intertextual readings here. Okay, Zella, please teach us. What do you?
I'm sure this is not so. No, there's so many references. The idea of selling. Selling for what? Here they have sandals, but I think that means something insignificant. Although I'm not sure. The idea of father and son go to the same girl. That's like Reuven and Yaakov, and then the garments taken in pledge. Everything about Yosef has to do with the garments.
Wow.
And about the idea of destroying the Amorite and using a metaphor of a tree. I was thinking of Yaakov burying the people's Traphim underneath the tree. And the Nazarites, I don't know, Shimshon, Shmuel, I'm not sure if, that kind of makes sense in this, but it is amazing. And the idea of a wagon with cut grain going down to Egypt to buy grain. It's like, probably you could find a million things in here.
I just want to say, lest you think that my asking you to think was just some sort of like interactive pedagogic trick. You actually, some things you said I noticed myself, and many I did not. So, so I personally appreciate that. I think that there are potentially many connections here. So let's circle back to them. I just want to make sure that we hold on to some things that you noticed, right? You noticed the selling, right? The selling amichrama kesav sadik v'avyom bavor na'alayim. We're going to return to that in just a minute. But you also, and you commented, what is you sort of raised a question for us. What does this even mean, right? They sell they sell an avyom for a pair of shoes or a pair of sandals. What is that imagery meant to? What's it saying? Is that like a lot, or what does that mean?
Yeah.
Your point about isha v'yalchu al na'ara. Okay, so you noticed that, and then this idea of the bigadim. This I did not notice, so I appreciate that a lot. But this idea of seizing garments, right? Now, bigadim chavulim probably means when someone right, when someone who's in need takes a loan, so they leave their garment. Either they leave their garment as like a sort of collateral from the get-go, or as it's indicated elsewhere in Exodus and elsewhere, the garment is seized as not collateral from the get-go, but is seized in lieu of payment. So if the person doesn't have the cash, so they seize their clothes. That's what the Torah says. If you do that, you got to make sure that you return the poor's garment at night, right? Because they're going to need it to sleep. Or if you're going to take their garment, and here we have people who are reclining by those garments, by the altar, and drinking wine in Beit Elohim. So they do go to shul here, as it were. They do go to the temple, but the temple is, if you use some sort of, if you excuse the analogy, like the chairs are made plush, right, with the meager funds of the poor. The point of the Emory, I think, is very important as well, because remember that in Genesis, the idea of like avon ha'emori is a significant moment, right, where it's sort of taken to mean the time that the sin of the Emory is that which has to sort of be like played out before Abraham's family can inherit the land. So I think God here saying in the voice of Amos, Anochi hishmanati et Hamorim b'nehem, I got rid of the Amori, is referencing that time period, right? It means like this is I gave you the land, right? I removed the Amori from the land and I gave it to you. It's a reference to Genesis. Okay, so terrific. The Nazir part I also want to come back to. I think that's an important point. Anybody else? I have to stop share for a second because I see chats, but I can't read it when I'm screen sharing. Kathy, I'm going to read what you wrote. In both Amos and the Parashah, there's a degradation of values. The brothers ate bread and drank while Yosef was in the pit. Huh. Very interesting. In the same way, Amos talks about the poor and the downtrodden. Yeah, and I think what you're saying here, what I'm seeing here at least, is it's not only Amos talks about the poor and the downtrodden, Amos is critiquing a society where there are the poor and the downtrodden, and those who are of means are taking advantage of the poor and the downtrodden and are living in some kind of relative opulence, right? Are reclining on these garments and are drinking wine and such, even in God's space at the expense of the poor, and that is the society to which he talks. In the same way, she says the brothers sold Joseph for his coat. Amos talks about selling the brothers for a pair of shoes. It's interesting, selling Joseph for his coat. They do. It's interesting, they do take the coat, and the coat apparently sparks jealousy. So that's interesting. Amos talks about the consequences of such behavior, and the Parashah alludes, I see, to the consequences of the behavior of the brothers. Okay, terrific. So maybe what I'm hearing Kathy say is, among all the other things that Kathy notices, is Amos is sort of playing out the just desserts that would come to the brothers, as it were, that's to say, to his people, right? As they sell out a brother, right? As they sell out a brother for his shoes, for a pair of sandals. Okay, terrific. And Rumel says just one word, Tamar. I think I know what you mean, but what do you mean? Just got to unmute.
She had the staff, I think, and the cloak. When she was going to be punished, and he, who made you pregnant, or who is the father, because he didn't pay his money, when he was along the road, and she had his clothes, and she said he is the one that got me pregnant.
Right. Okay, right. And do you recognize this, right? Hakirna, do you recognize this, right? Which has allusions to the Joseph story, indeed. So that's true in terms of like the things that she showed Judah, right, to demonstrate. But I also want to point out that when the verse speaks in here, let me just share the screen again. When the verse speaks of Ish va'aviv yelchu el hana'ara leman chalel et shem kadshi, to me that evokes not only Reuven, but evokes Judah and his own son, right? Because Judah, what ends up happening is that Judah sleeps with, right, his daughter-in-law. So Ish va'aviv go to the same na'ara leman chalel et shem kadshi. In fact, she is called in the text. She dresses up like a Kadesha, right? I guess it's often translated like a harlot, if you will. But it might also be a cultic prostitute, a cultic harlot, which maybe that's how she dressed up. So if it's like a Kadesha, it's even a closer potential reference, right? So it's a referencing. In that case, if we're sort of on target in connecting those two stories, and we have there Amos referencing that story as well and mapping it onto his own people. So I think everything that you guys were noticing is right on target. And what I wanted to do with you is circle back to some of your points and maybe sort of embellish or add on to them. So let's go to this verse. Al Mechram. I have a little source sheet I put together here because Al Mechram ba Kesef Sadik ve'Avyom ba'Avor Na'alayim. This is a sort of an evocative verse. It's not even clear what it means, on its own right. But I do want to note the following. First of all, if you're looking to connect the Parashah with the Haftorah, or if you find somebody who has done so, it's worth noting that tzaddik, like stam tzaddik, right, unattributed righteous person in rabbinic literature is, or I shouldn't say unattributed, but the one who receives the appellation tzaddik is none other than Joseph. It's Yosef HaTzadik. For example, the Talmud says in Tractate Yoma Amru Alav al Yosef HaTzadik, they would say about Joseph the Tzaddik that Bechol Yom Yom Hayta Esha Potifar Mishtadlo B'Dvarim. Every day, the wife of Potiphar would try to seduce him. Whatever. I won't read the whole story, but this is just one example from rabbinic literature where he's called the Tzaddik, Yosef HaTzadik. That is his appellation, throughout Jewish tradition. Maybe because of the story of his sort of withholding temptation with the right of with the wife of Potiphar, with Eshet Potiphar. Maybe for his sort of reticence or his sort of self-restraint with regards to his brothers. That emerges from this text, from the Midrash Lekach Tov, where the Midrash teaches when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, he kisses them and cries over them. He bursts into tears. So the Midrash says, why did he do that? Kidei lefaisam, to appease them, to sort of calm them down. Ki ra'a otam mitbayashim mimenu. He saw that they were ashamed in front of him. Once he said, I am Joseph. He says to them as follows: Ata lo atem shlachtem oti hena ki Elohim ki lemechya shelchan Elohim lifneichem. It wasn't you who sent me here, and ultimately it was God. God sent me here to provide sustenance. U'letovati hayad davar ki samani Elohim la'adon l'chom Mitzrayim. Actually, it's also for my own benefit. Look at me. I'm now the viceroy. I'm now Safnat Paneach. Va'adayin hayum b'shimim menu. And they were still embarrassed in front of him. They were ashamed. Maybe they felt guilty. Until he kissed them and cried over them and wept over them. And then then they spoke with him. This is why Joseph is called the Tzaddik, says the Midrash Lekach Tov. He calls the Tzaddik because he's ultimately able to reconcile with his brothers. Again, think about the connection between the Amos's time period, right? The split among the brothers who no longer even see each other as brothers, or so alienated from each other. And Joseph is able to, despite it all, eventually restrain himself and forgive, right? And reconcile. Lakach Mikra Yosef HaTzadik. And indeed, the Midrash cites our very verse, Shne'emar Al Mechram LaKesav Tzadik. For they sold, I'll translate, for they sold for money a tzaddik, the tzaddik. Okay. In fact, a certain sort of strict reading of this midrash might indicate that the verse in Amos from our Haftorah is like the proof text or the source for the idea that Joseph is Yosef HaTzadik. So you have the notion of al mechram ba'kesef tzaddik, and tzaddik is none other than Joseph. Now, what does it mean, umechram ba'kesef? Umechram ba'kesef kesef tzaddik. Well, it could mean simply that they sold the tzaddik, and al mechram ba'kesef is just saying, it's a way of saying they sold for money, right? A tzaddik, but they sold a tzaddik. Tzaddik again could mean Joseph. Tzaddik here is paralleled with Evyon, with a downtrodden person, which is kind of a rare pairing. And tzaddik, it's worth noting, is often has sort of a how do they call it, like a legal meaning, which is to say one who is innocent, one who has been vindicated in a case, right? A non is the opposite of a rasha, a guilty person. So how exactly that's to do with an Evyon isn't explicit, but it's clear these are two sympathetic and potentially, in this case, vulnerable characters. So it could mean simply that for selling a tzaddik may be into slavery, selling a tzaddik into servitude. Maybe it means that. Maybe it means amechrama kesef tzaddik, that you, people in power, judges or otherwise, we're willing to sell out a tzaddik. We're willing to sell out the righteous, sell out an innocent person for money, just for money. And that would segue into the second part of the verse, interestingly, V'avyon ba'avor na'alayim. And not only that, are you willing to sell out the tzaddik for money, meaning you take a bribe? Maybe you're a judge and you took shochad in their case. But not only that, but evyon, and you're also willing to sell out or sell an evyon for a pair of na'alayim. And maybe it means even for a pair of na'alayim, even for sandals, you're willing to sell out the poor. This is his critique, almost, of his society. But amechrama kesef tzaddik could be taken as follows, with reference to eventually, right, to our Parashah. I'll just note that I just alluded to these different readings of the verse. So I won't read it inside right now. But if you're interested, Rashi and Radak, right, in there, these medieval commentators try to figure out and have different readings of, what they see as the shot of this verse. What does it mean? The evyon ba'avor na'alayim. Maybe it's speaking again to someone who had to sort of sell their land or sell themselves into servitude, or maybe it means taking bribery in order of a bribe and selling out an innocent person in that context. I'll just read the last line of Radak here. One reading is Mechayavina tazakai kidei shitzarecha ani limkor sadehu. He's critiquing almost the judges who indict and find guilty an innocent person to such an extent that now this poor innocent person has to sell their fields, sell them their possessions totally, shahu bena'al, which is accomplished via a shoe. And now remember the story of Ruth, where when they want to concretize and formalize, or maybe symbolize the sale of the property, and sort of, the Goel has to, sell to Boaz any relationship to that inheritance, and to Ruth herself, and all, and to Naomi, excuse me, that there's some sort of like, kinyan accomplished by virtue of the shoe, right? That the shoe is involved in one way or another, maybe symbolizing the transaction and such. So bena'alayim, Radak is arguing, means, and you're forcing this poor person, evyon, to sell out of their holdings, ba'avor na'alayim, right? For shoes, not in order to get shoes, but in sort of a full sense of the kinyan na'alayim. What's interesting is that you have the following kind of midrash from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. This is not the only source which goes this way, which links this story and this verse explicitly with our Parashah. When the brothers sell Joseph for 20 kesef, right? Kol echad ve'echad natal shnei ksafim. If there's 10 brothers and they sold it for 20, they each get 2. Liknot mina'alayim b'ragleihem, and they used it to buy shoes for their feet. Shne'amar al mechram ba'kesef sadik ve'avyon ba'avor na'alayim. As it says, our Haftorah, our verse, for selling the kesef sadik, and the poor ba'avor na'alayim, for but a pair of shoes. So this is a midrash which makes explicit this connection between our verse and our story. And the question is, what exactly is the critique of the brothers here? Right, that they sold Joseph for a pair of shoes. What does that mean exactly? So one possibility I saw, which I like, gets back to our story in Breshit, because in Breshit 37. Right. Remember that the brothers, encountered Joseph, this dreamer. Here comes this dreamer full of words, and they're going to dump him in the pit and leave him there, it seems, to die. And then they happen to see the Ishmaelites coming, going down to Egypt, And Judah says to his brothers, Ma betza, Ma, the infamous words, Ma, what's our profit here? What do we gain by killing our brother? Here's our right, the mechira. Let's sell him to the Yishmaelim. Let's sell him to let's not kill him. Because he's our brother. Right? After all, he's our brother. And the brothers listen and they sell him for 20 pieces of silver. And that's how Joseph gets down to Egypt. Now, the pathos of this story, I mean, it's abundant, but let's make one point here. By sort of virtue of like a kind of an eerie question. Who's worse? The other brothers or Judah? You know, what's worse? Taking your brother and dumping him in a pit to die, or selling him, right? After all, he is our brother. He is flesh of our flesh and blood of our blood. And by the way, what profit is there actually if we just kill him here? Ma betza, what do we gain from that? Let's sell him down to Egypt. And unless you have an extremely sort of apologetic reading of Judah, then I think you could argue, and maybe this is what Amos is doing, or at least the juxtaposition of Amos to our Haftorah accomplishes. What it accomplishes, what it argues is that Judah actually is much worse. Because if you're going to sell your brother because you hate him, right? You hate his words, you hate his jacket, you hate him, you hate your father's relationship to him. Behu na'ar, dibatam ra'al avihem, etc. Okay, so not like a sort of a beautiful bedtime story, but okay, you're going to kill her. But if you are Judah, who actually says, you know what, it's not just hate, he's our brother. Let's get some profit out of this. Ma betza, we can actually earn a buck. Well, that already shows that you're thinking at a different level, and the fact that thinking on that level can still allow you to sell out your brother to Egypt, that already is just that's just perverse at a whole nother level. Right? Ma betza. And maybe that is indeed what this Midrash and Amos is getting at least Amos as juxtaposed our Parashah, right? The Midrash is saying it's bad enough there's 20 shekel they're willing to sell out their brother, right? But each of them only got 2. What can you get with 2? You can get a pair of shoes, I guess one kesef each for each pair, each of the shoes. And for that, you're willing to sell out the tzaddik. For that, you're willing to sell the avion just for a pittance. That already is horrific. So I wonder if that's what's happening here, right? It's response to it's a dark reading of the Parsha, but and remember that Judah ultimately kind of redeems himself, but redeems himself from quite the depth, right? From quite the depths. And John is talking to people who are reclining by the altar, drinking, reclining on pledged garments. Right? It's a period of relative abundance, apparently, at least for some. Remember that in Vayeshev, we started with Jacob and his family finally getting back to the land, right? The land of his fathers. They have great wealth and possessions, right? So they're home, they're well off, they're in their land, and eventually what happens? The brothers sell each other off for a pair of shoes. So the critique of his society, riffing off of the story of Joseph, is biting. It's a biting one. And it's, there are those who've argued, it strikes me as kind of on point, that, one of the major challenges of our communities today, there's obviously people are in financial need, in our communities, and it's not the most, it's a challenging time economically, but we also live at a time of historic abundance. And the challenge of living correctly with and through material abundance is, I don't know if it's the primary moral challenge of our day, but it's one of them. So Amos, I think, speaks to us. Can we live at a time of abundance and yet not become so attached to it that we become blind and sell off our brother for a pair of shoes? I think that is quite the sort of contemporaneous critique emerging from Amos. The notion that the sale of Joseph is a historically resonant one finds expression in the Midrash and liturgically going forward. So, in the Midrash and the Sifra, which I won't read inside right now, I'll just note that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur of all days brings they slaughter I'm sorry, this is when they inaugurate the Ohel Moed, excuse me. They slaughter a Se'iri Zim, right, a goat, and they slaughter an egel, a calf. And the Midrash says that the calf, we know, is there to atone for the golden calf. That's another day, another story. But the Se'iri Zim is meant to atone for the Ma'aseh Izim, and the Ma'aseh Izim is the goat's blood, which the brothers used to disguise Joseph's garment with blood and to trick their father. Right, here's Joseph's blood. So the point is that when you're inaugurating the tabernacle, there's like two primordial sins, if you will, two primary sins that you have to reckon with. One, the golden calf. Okay, that's sort of not surprising. But what is to me more surprising is the reckoning of the sin of selling of Joseph, right? That echoes in history as like one of the two primary sins, selling out your brother for a pair of shoes. And we find this idea of selling the pair of shoes in various sources. So even on speaking of Yom Kippur, in the piyut of the 10 martyrs, the Asara Harugei Malchut, this midrash finds voice because remember, there's the 10 Asara Harugei, the 10 martyrs, and those 10 martyrs are in a way stand-ins for the 10 brothers, right? 10 brothers who, and their primordial sin of selling out their other brother. And the text says, the poet says, the piyut says, Heim ka'anulo ometa ganafahu, right? They're being queried, right? What would you do to someone who kidnapped their brother and sold him? And they said, the kidnapper dies, is put to death. So he says, Ayeh avotechem asher achehem necharu. Well, then what about your fathers? Where are they? Your father sold their brother, right? L'orchat Yishmaelim secharuhu, to a traveling band of Yishmaelim, uveyad na'alayim nitanuhu, and for a pair of shoes. So that is, if you ever read that, liturgically, you're saying, what are they talking about? It's a reference to our Haftorah. This notion of selling out your brother for but a pair of shoes. I do want to note that this I just sort of find intriguing, that this idea of the sale of Joseph as prefiguration. So it's prefiguration not only of the splitting of the tribes and prefiguration for Amos, maybe of his time period, and like the betrayal of brother against brother, but the Abarbanel, writing from medieval Spain, notes that that some Christian scholars, Christian contemporaries or such, they said, this is talking about Jesus, right? For selling out the righteous one, for Kesef, Ze Yeshu HaNotzri. And he responds to that and tries to say, no, that can't be, But, I think that actually, in a way, is literarily so. As to say, I don't mean that the Chumash is talking about Jesus, but I mean that the New Testament traditions are referencing the Joseph story, right? Because it's Judas, I assume, plays off of Judah from our Parashah, right? It is Judas who says, what are you willing to give me if I deliver Jesus to you? He says to the high priest. And they count out 30 pieces of silver. So it's not 20, but okay. 30 pieces of silver. And then Judas waited for opportunity. So what is Judas doing? Ma betza, that's what Judas is doing. What are you going to give me for this, right? So it's one thing to betray the righteous. It's another thing to betray the righteous. But what's in it for me? What do I get? What do I get out of it? You find this in other Christian texts explicitly. I was looking around and I found some, I won't read it inside, but from some other early Christian texts, which make explicit the reading of the righteous one in our Parashah as being not Joseph, but Jesus. But in the Jewish tradition, it's obviously not Jesus. In the Jewish tradition, the Sadiq is Joseph, and therefore it's the selling of Joseph for but a pair of shoes, which is so tragic and which echoes forth in history. I mentioned the point about going to the same Na'ara and Judah and his son, but I also want to get back to this notion of the Nazarites, which Zella pointed to, because what happens is in Amos, to remind you, the prophet says that God says, "I took you out of Egypt, I brought you here, and you know what I did to you? I made your children into Nevi'im and your sons into Nazirim, but you perverted that." Or, you corrupted that. You fed the Nazirim yayin, wine, which they may not partake of, and the Nazirim. And on the prophets, you said to these prophets, quiet. Don't prophesy. Don't prophesy. And I want to remember, with regards to the Nevi'im, and then we'll talk about Nazirim, that, maybe I'm overreading here, but in our Parashah, the one who has visions, who has dreams, who speaks is Joseph, right? And he's the one who sees, and they don't like what he has to say for a bunch of reasons, right? But at the end of the day, they say, in the midst of their living, they say, we don't want to hear from you. Lo tinavu, right? They stop it up. And this reminds me of that, right? But more pointedly is this Nazir thing. And I actually think that I'm not overreading here. Joseph, the character Joseph, is understood by at least some traditions in Chazal as being a Nazarite. And that emerges textually from two places in the Chumash, two poetic moments of blessing, at the end of Berachot Yaakov and at the end of the Torah, right, when Moshe blesses the people. When in both places, when Joseph, the person, or Joseph, the tribe, is blessed, Tihiyena lerosh Yosef, Ulakatkod Nazir Echav. Tavoat lerosh Yosef, Ulakakod Nazir Echav. Joseph, now Nazir here might mean, what it might mean is that Joseph should be, let's get to the question of what a Nazir is, right? Joseph should be a Nazarite, yes, but Nazir also means forehead or crown, right? So it might be saying Joseph should be, right, at the head. Joseph should wear the crown. Joseph should rule in a sense, okay? And this has to do with the character of Joseph in Egypt, but also, what he represents as a sort of an alternate firstborn.
Like the Kohen Gadol.
What's that?
Like the Kohen Gadol with the.
That's right, Nazir Roshah, exactly, because when he wears the frontlet, so he indeed is wearing something, a sort of a crown on his forehead, exactly. So Nazir in that sense might mean it's a reference to somebody who, some sort of royalty. It also carries the meaning, like in other places, the root of the word also carries the meaning of separation, right? Of Havdalah. So Rashi actually in Devarim says Nazir Echav shehufrash me'achav b'chirato. He was a Nazir because when he was sold, he became separated out from his brothers. So he's the one who's separated out. And now you start to see why he actually is a Nazir, because he is the royal one in a certain version, right? He is the separate one, right? He is made to be so. He makes himself to be so, but he's made to be so. And this is actually taken, I would say literally, but literally kind of like metaphorically, that's to say by the Gemara in Shabbat, where they say he actually literally is a Nazir. Amar, this is one tradition, but it's worth noting. Amar Rabbi Milai Mishum Rabbi Yitzchak Magdala Miyom Sheperesh Yosef Me'achav, from the time that Joseph was separated from his brothers, Lo Ta'am Yain, he stopped drinking wine. He never would drink wine from that moment on. Tichtiv Ulakatkod Nazir Echav. And now Yosef Rechina says they also didn't drink wine until they actually are reconciled, and that's a whole interesting thing. So here it's explicit, this tradition that Joseph himself might be a Nazir, and therefore reading this idea of I gave your children Nazirim, but you perverted that stature. You told the prophets and the dreamers, quiet up. We don't want to hear it. finds perhaps some form of echo. Just to get one step further, even, and this is not my own chidush by any stretch, but we know that when Joseph, in the beginning of his time, the time that airtime in the Chumash, when he's introduced, we're told Haya ro'et achav batzon, he would shepherd with his brothers, Behu na'ar et b'nei Bilhah et b'nei Zilpah, and he was a na'ar with. What does that mean? He was a na'ar with the children of b'nei Bilhah and b'nei Zilpah. So the Midrash, Rashi cites it, says Shahaya oseh ma'aseh na'arut. He did sort of na'arisha stuff, right? Literally, right? He acted like a child, like an adolescent. Mitakem b'sa'aro, he was fixing his hair, and he was mimashmish be'einav kadei she'yeh nireh yafeh, so that he should look good, right? That's what he was doing. And I reference this because this idea of someone, caring for a male, I should say, caring for their locks and their hair, you think of Shimshon maybe, but you also think of texts like the following from the Gemara Nedarim, Amar Rav Shimon HaTzadik. Rav Shimon HaTzadik says that I never ate the asham of Nazir Tameh except once. Only one time I was really impressed by a particular Nazir, I'll put it that way. He says, Pam achat ba'adam echad Nazir min hadarom. I once met a Nazir who came from the south, and I saw that he has yafeh einayim v'tov ro'i ukvutzotav sedurot lo taltalim. I saw that he was very, handsome and pretty, and his hair were just sort of like a whole lock of curls. And the story goes on. Actually, it sort of sounds like a narcissist type story, as others have pointed out. This person, this Nazir from the south, speaks of his coming to terms with his own sort of hedonism and self-love and narcissism, actually, as anchored in his appearance and in his hair. So maybe this is also part of the notion of Yosef as a form of a kind of a Nazir, right? Somebody who has these long locks, but also somebody who has to sort of reckon with similar challenges. But either way, I think that the idea that this notion of feeding the Nazirim yayin, the reference to Nazir here, might be taken as a reference to Joseph, potentially. And zooming back even further, I think that the critique of Amos' people is very striking, because he says to them is, you're comfortable, you're comfortably corrupt. You're comfortable in selling out the poor for but a pair of shoes, and you don't want to hear anything different. You don't want to hear prophets prophesizing, and you don't want Nazirim walking around. And I wonder if what he's saying is, you don't want that different dream, that different vision, that different example in your midst. You'd rather feed them wine, because the idea of the Nazir, someone who is different than you all, someone who is represents an alternate vision, where instead of drinking wine by the altar, he doesn't drink wine at all. Right? You actually don't even want to be confronted with it. So you'd rather just feed them wine and tell them to be quiet up. It's a very biting critique of a certain type of comfortable, corrupt, and stagnant society, one which self-isolates itself from any possible alternate voices. Are you sure this is what you want to be? It actually feeds the Nazirim wine. And in a way, I think that also ends up being a read of our Parashah, right? And what really is going on with the brothers and Joseph. The final thing I want to say, almost out of time, and then I'll take a look at the chat, is that these references to our Parashah are not explicit, right? So we've explored over the course of the past weeks, I think, a variety of Haftorah examples, and in doing so, encountered different models of linkage between Haftorah and Parashah. Sometimes it's extremely explicit, Kimei Noach Li, or even these past weeks in the end of Hosea, where the prophet Hosea explicitly leverages and references the Jacob narrative explicitly, right? Yaakov, Barach, and all that. Here, it's more implicit, if there. It's possible that the choice of this Haftorah for our Parsha, it's possible that choice reflects some early midrashic reading of Amos, right? Some early interpretation which sees in Amos reference to our Parsha, and that maybe, in fact, caused the linkage of this Haftorah of this passage to our Parsha and its choice as our Haftorah. Once it's already linked, so then more connections I think emerge. But I just think on a sort of mythological level, it's an interesting insight, interesting point about the different the way that you may see here an ancient or basically an old midrash sort of implicit in the choice of this text as our Haftorah. Okay, let me pause here and take a look at the chat and see what we got here. So Rumel Kathy says, right, also talks about why he may be called a tzaddik, right? Or how Zella, did the Egyptians drink wine? I thought they drank beer. I don't know. Don't the brothers drink beer with Joseph when they're down there? Drink wine, excuse me.
I don't know. That's what I was wondering, if the idea that he never drank wine again also refers to something that doesn't.
He has no outrights, right? That they're squeezing from the vine. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
I thought how you did this was really brilliant, but there's something about the whole, what does it serve us? What Jude is saying. I think he wants Joseph out. I think they all want Joseph away, far away. And when he's saying what good, all of a sudden, they're going to kill him. But something is irking him, because he's saying, after all, he's our brother. And so all of a sudden up pops this other alternative. Oh, wait a minute, we can sell him. I'm not so sure it's one of these cold-hearted, we'll get some money for the guy, we don't like him anyway, as much as it gave him a way of not killing him. Yeah. But got rid of him. I mean, that's the whole point. Just get this kid out of here. He's ruining our relationship with our father, and I'm not sure.
That's the point. Is that sort of a ruse to convince his brothers?
Yeah. In a way, yeah. What difference does it make killing him versus not killing him? But he realizes that not killing him is better, and it achieves the same end. Yeah, we're free of this kid.
Yeah, that's why I said earlier that there's like different ways of reading Judah. I think that sounds very, very possible to me. I guess I would argue that. So maybe I'll say this: that the choice of this Haftorah for our Parsha, that choice pushes towards a different reading of Judah. That's what I would say. Not the only reading, but maybe a different reading of Judah. But I think your reading of Judah is very possible. By the way, we're gonna have to stop, but I just want to I don't have time right now, but I was wondering if we'd have more time. I'd say something that Hanukkah is coming up, right? And this Parsha is always around Hanukkah. We read Mizmor, was it Psalm 30? I think Mizmor Shir Chanukata Bayit David, right, on Hanukkah. Chanukata Bayit David. But when you read that psalm, it doesn't sound like it's something to do with Hanukkah per se. But I do want to say that I think that there are a bunch of possible allusions to our story in that text, right? Including, look for the phrase Ma Betza in that psalm, right? And there Israel talks to God, Ma Betza, and then you'll notice other connections to our story, including going down into pits. Anyway, I wonder how that psalm is also reading the Judah point, Zella. So I know we have each other's emails. So maybe we can talk about that offline. This Ma Betza thing, and who is Judah actually? But I don't know. I think the Haftorah pushes us in one direction, but it's only one possible direction, right? Your direction is also, I think, an interesting read. Okay. So by the way, this is our.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zal. So this is our last, by the way, Haftorah session of this Zman, of this term. But we're, plan is to pick up again the next term. So hope to see you. And how about each of you bring 3 friends, and we'll send you a a coffee on us. I don't know how we're going to pull that off, but as it were. Anyway, hope to see you then. Okay, thanks, Noah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. As Dr. Kelsen noted, this is the last session for this term of this class, and we look forward to learning with you again very, very soon. Be well.